Today on Stamp TV, I'm going to show you a fun Christmas card featuring the Snowman Wishes and Merry Tree stamp set duos. Our deeply etched pre-cut rubber stamp set holiday duos mix and match for tons of great combinations. Let me show you the tools and products you're going to need to make this card project. First, let me show you these duos up close here. The one that I'm going to use for the focal image is going to be this snowman from the Snowman Wishes stamp set duo. And then this little Merry Tree stamp set duo. I love the greeting here, Merry Christmas, so I'm going to mix those together. And you can see that you can also mix the tree with the winter wishes, so there's lots of combinations that you can do when you have several of our holiday stamp set duos. Now, just for your own reference, all of our stamp set duos come on our rich red rubber. But when we get our initial plates in, we test them on brown rubber. So that's why my stamps are made of brown rubber, but they're exactly the same. So when you get these, as far as the quality of the rubber, this is just a test thing that comes to us. So yours will look like this, even though you see mine are a little bit of a different color rubber. The rubber's all the same. Okay, some of the other things you're going to need are some ink pads, and I'm going to use the Gina K Designs Red Hot ink, and I'm going to mix that with some Versamark so I can create an embossed greeting using Red Hot. Then I'm also going to use some of the Memento black ink, the Tuxedo black, because I'm going to be doing some Copic coloring, and I know a lot of you really like the Memento black ink for Copic coloring. You're also going to need some Copic markers, and the colors that I have here are G29, which is Pine Tree Green. I have W3, which is Warm Gray. I have YR15, Pumpkin Yellow. BG10, which is Cool Shadow. R27, which is Cadmium Red. And I have 0, which is the colorless blender pen. You're also going to need a sponge dauber. And then you're going to need some embossing powder. I'm using the Ranger Superfine Detail Clear, and I have my embossing magic pad. This is an anti-static pad, and it removes static from the surface of your card, and it also will remove any oils or debris that happens to be on your cardstock. This way, your embossing powder will only stick to the ink and not to anything else that's on the surface of the card. I also have some ribbon here. I'm using the Gina K Designs Red Hot Gingham ribbon. I have some 1/4-inch pop dots, some adhesive, and scissors. And then I'm using one of the Spellbinders classic or standard ovals dies. This is the largest die that comes in the pack. Now you can also use a punch. Maybe you have a big Marvy punch that's an oval, or you may have an electronic cutter that you can use. You can use either a silhouette or a Cricut. There's lots of shapes available for those, and you can make those any size you want. You also may have a die from another company that you can use. And then for cardstock, I have some of the Gina K Designs Red Hot cardstock. I'm also using some of the Ivory cardstock. And then I have some patterned paper, and this is from our Merry Little Christmas patterned paper pack. All right, so to begin, I'm going to start by stamping the snowman, and I'm going to do that with some of the Memento Tuxedo black ink. And I'm going to stamp him right in the center of this piece of cardstock because I want to make sure that I have clearance around the outside to cut this out with my oval die. So we'll stamp that first. And then you can always check it before you do all your coloring work just to make sure, and obviously in this case I have a big enough piece that that's not going to be a problem. But if you are cutting it close, you may want to check it first to make sure it's going to cut before you do all the coloring work. Then I'm going to take this piece of ivory cardstock. Now I've cut this piece to work with my Red Hot card base. And I'm going to stamp the image directly onto the bottom of this piece. Let me use a little bit of that embossing magic pad to get rid of static and stuff. And then I'm going to first ink up my stamp using some Versamark ink. So I want to get it nice and sticky. And the Versamark ink takes a nice long time to dry. And then I'm going to use some of the Red Hot right on top of that. Now, that will not hurt your ink pad, so you don't have to worry about that. But you do want to work a little bit more quickly because you are working with a dye ink, even though you have Versamark on there. So I'm going to position that where I want it and stamp it. And once that's stamped, I'm going to grab that clear embossing powder and I'm going to sprinkle it right on top of that greeting. And then using a piece of scrap paper, I'll get rid of the excess. And then the clear is a little bit harder to see if you have any stuck to the cardstock, so you may want to just blow on it a couple times to make sure that it's only sticking right to that Versamark ink. And then you can heat that with a heat tool. I'm using the Marvy heat tool. And you'll be able to see the difference here. Let me see if we can get a tighter shot for you so you can see. It will start to get brighter once the embossing powder melts on top. Can you see how the Merry looks brighter than the Christmas right now? And then we'll emboss the rest of that. So now you have the image that you want that's stamped with dye ink to coordinate, but it's also nice and shiny because it's got some embossing powder on top of it. And that just makes it look a little bit more festive. And this can be adhered immediately to this Red Hot card base. I'm going to do that with some of my mono adhesive. And because when you emboss, it does kind of wrinkle the paper a little bit, you may want to use a little bit of extra tape to make sure that it lays nice and flat. So we'll get that into place. And now we're ready to color the snowman. So the first color that I'm going to use is the red. I want to use this R27, which is the cadmium red. And I have the original markers here, but you can use sketch or chow markers. It doesn't really matter. The marker style is really a preference. What kind of barrel you like to hold, what kind of tip you like on the end of the marker. The ink inside the marker is exactly the same, so you'll get the same results no matter what style marker you have. And again, you guys know that I am not a Copic coloring goddess like some of the wonderful educators that are out there that can teach you all kinds of really cool blending techniques. Nope, not me. I like to color just kind of my own way. And what I really like about the Copic markers is they're not streaky. Like water-based markers can be very streaky. So when you color nice flat color like that, just, you know, without any blending at all, you get a solid blend of color with no streaking. So that's one of the reasons I love the Copic markers, is because it's such a clean look. But I also love some of the techniques you can do with the colorless blender, and that's what I'm going to do to this little guy's hat. So let me finish up his scarf here, and then we're going to have a little bit of fun with the colorless blender. The other thing I really like about Copic markers is the clarity of the ink. You can use a really dark marker, like I'm going to do with that pine marker. That's a really dark green, but it's a clear dark green, so it doesn't take away the detail that's in the rubber stamp. And that's really important if you've got a lot of detail in your stamps, but you want to go with a darker color. The Copic markers will allow you to go with that darker color, and you still won't lose any of the detail. This is the G29 Pine Tree Green. And like I said, I'm going to color over all of this, but we're not going to lose the detail of the black lines. And I do like the original markers because I like the square barrel when you're working with the airbrush gun. Although I'm not too skilled with it, it is fun to play with and to add a little texture to your cards. But the sketch markers are great too. Okay, now I'm going to go with the colorless blender, and I'm just going to add a little bit of a check to the top of his hat. And you can see I'm just doing these straight lines going down. And you can see them appearing already. I love this technique. It gives such a neat look. And most people wonder how you did that. And then I'm going to go the other way and add lines going across this way. And that will give me my kind of a check or a plaid kind of look. And that gives a lot of texture to his hat. Now I'm just going to do some lines going across the rim here. And if you give it a couple seconds, you'll start to see those lines coming up. And if you want them a little darker, you can go back over it a second time. And that'll give you a little bit more blending there. The colorless blender really isn't a blending pen. It's a color removing pen is what it is. So wherever you want color to lighten up, you can remove some of it by using the colorless blender. Now I'm using the YR15, which is the pumpkin yellow, and I'm going to color his nose that color. And this is one of the sketch markers, and you can see that fine tip is perfect for fine detail as well. Using the W3 warm gray number 3, I'm going to add a little bit of shading to him, just a little bit of shadow. It's just going to give a little bit more depth and definition to this image. Make it look a little bit more dimensional. Like that. I can add a little bit of shadowing under the scarf here. Like that. So easy to do, and it really does kind of make a difference. Now, the final color that I'm going to use is the BG10, and I'm just going to add some of this real frosty, light turquoise blue around the outside just to make the whole image glow. And this really kind of makes the whole thing look like watercolor. Kind of pops off of that ivory cardstock. And just right around the bottom. And you can make that line as thick or as thin as you want it to be. Kind of adds a little chill there too. Makes it look a little bit colder. Alright, so now my next step is going to be to cut out this image using my Cuttlebug and that oval die. So I'm going to use an A and a B plate to start, and then get my image on there and line up that oval. So that looks pretty good. And then I'm going to use the C plate on top and cut. Now because I am using the largest oval, there really isn't an oval to mat this over. So I am going to emboss it, and you can see our ivory cardstock will bleed through. So if you're making a single layer card, choose our white cardstock instead. Our 120-pound white will not bleed through, but the ivory does. So now I have the rubber mat on top and the B plate and a piece of chipboard, because I need it to be just a little bit tighter when it goes through. And every die cutting machine is different, so check yours first without it, and then if you need the extra pressure, you can add the chipboard. Okay, so that is ready to be applied to the card. So my next step is going to be to add a little bit of pattern paper to this project. And I'm going to do that with this Merry Little Christmas pattern paper piece and some more Red Hot cardstock. I'm going to adhere those together using some mono adhesive. And this piece is actually not a true square. It's a little bit longer on one side, so I'm going to have to lay it onto the card to see which way it looks best. So let me grab my card here, and I think that will be good, just like that. So I'm going to add a little bit of ribbon across the center. Let me find my raw edge there. We'll add a little bit of that, And I like those two patterns, how they contrast. It's really fun to mix different patterns, checks and swirls and dots and things. So we'll adhere that on with a little bit of mono adhesive. There we go. And then this whole panel is going to go onto my card base. I'm going to add a little bit of extra adhesive over the ribbon so that doesn't come apart. And line that up. Make sure it's straight, and it is. Okay. So now, like I said earlier, they don't have a larger die in the Spellbinders dies. You can do that, of course, with your electronic cutter, but you may just have a single punch, and you want to add a little bit of something behind that so it stands out a little bit more. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab my sponge dauber and some of this Red Hot Red Hot ink, and I'm going to rub that dauber over the ink, and then I'm going to add just a little bit of color right along the edge of that oval. See how that's coming up? Just a little bit, just enough that it adds a contrasting color around the perimeter, and it'll make it stand out just a little bit more against my cardstock. I have a frayed edge there. And you want to be delicate about it. You don't want it to be too smeary or too spongy looking coming in. Just enough to add a little bit of color there. There we go. And that's a real nice way to not have to add an additional layer. And you can see that a little bit better if I hold it up against some cardstock. You can see the red showing a little bit better there. It's a nice way of not having to add another layer, not having to add more weight to your card, but it still gives you a border that coordinates with the rest of the card. So now I'm going to apply this using some of the 1/4 inch pop dots. I'll just put 2 at the bottom and 2 at the top. And then we'll pop that onto that pattern paper, and we'll add a little bow or a little knot with some of the rest of that ribbon that I have, just for a nice detail. So we'll get that into place. Now, of course, you can take this to the next level if you want. It is a Christmas card, so maybe you want it to have a little bit of glitter. You can add some glitter. You can add a stardust pen to that. You can do pretty much anything you want here. I am going to add a little bit of ribbon here, and I'm going to just take the tip of my scissors and sneak it under there. And then I'm just going to tie a nice little knot. Just to finish off that one side. And then I will trim that. Like that. And like that. And that just gives it a little bit of something on the side there, a little bit more interest. And there is my finished card project. Make a bunch of these cards and leave the greeting space blank. This way you can personalize the greeting for any winter holiday, or you can use the card for other celebrations, such as a winter birthday or a special winter thank you.